welcome to the Integrate This podcast. I am Jeremy Mickle. I'm joined by co-host David Berner, just one of the Daves on the show here today. It feels like a little bit of a reunion of sorts. We have as our guest Dave Blanchard, the second of the Daves. They want to make me an honorary Dave for the day. I don't know if I can handle that much pressure with what the two of you bring. Dave, I've known him for a long time. We go back into probably the early mid 2000s, where Dave was a teacher in one of the districts which I work for now as part of that cooperative. And he's now since moved on to bigger, better things. And we're just super excited to have Dave with us here. He's going to bring kind of a perspective that we haven't really addressed on the show before, I think, as it touches on what's taking place in higher education as far as integration of technology, but also brings, I think, a wealth of knowledge and experience across, bridging different aspects of education and educational institutions. So, Dave, welcome. Why don't you give us a little bit of kind of that background, that origin, kind of like what made you realize that what you're doing is what it was supposed to be?
Yeah, thank you. And I think that one of the pieces that I always want to support and amplify is higher ed is not the bigger, better part of education. It is the older, clumsier part of education, I think. And so I am now on record saying that publicly, which I'm excited for the viral clip to go off for that. I am the director of online here at St. Cloud State University, and how I got here was maybe a cycle of who Dave is. In K-12, I started off as a classroom teacher in an elementary setting and found myself doing a lot with technology. Found myself seeking out places to learn and people to learn with, and found myself engaged at the technology conference in Minnesota, TIES. Found myself saying, hey, my colleague and I that I taught with really closely, we could run this session that we're attending that had a completely packed room. We should put one in for next year. And we never stopped. And so that was a really cool thing. After being a classroom teacher, I shifted into being a specialist and then a district curriculum and professional development coordinator throughout the district for that school. And in higher ed, I had a really similar piece. I was in teacher education for several years. I got pulled into some special projects, and then I got pulled into middle management again. And so my wife just the other day joked that I'm hitting my timeline and that we'll have a career change and reset coming up pretty soon. And so who knows what's next for Dave? I think the origin story is really thinking about how we use learning and how we use what we know about learning and how we use technology in learning, and thinking about how we make the most rich and engaged experiences for learners, whoever they are, elementary students, teachers in a district, people who want to be teachers, or faculty who are continuing to get better. Use what we have available in our modern classroom experiences to help students learn. And that's a big feat, and it happens no matter where you go within education or any training environments. We want to make sure that people have realistic skill sets, that people have skill sets for the society that they will be leading, not the society that we all thrived in, because there's a difference. We all grew up in a time when what we had was what we had, and we got to education because we either liked education or we pushed back against education, and we wanted to change it. And for our students, whoever they are, whatever type of student, I think that those similar pieces of ensuring that they're having authentic experiences, that they are using the tools that they'll be expected to use, and in the next steps, those are all important pieces.
So it sounds to me like what you're saying is like the goals are the same.
Yeah, I think so.
Regardless of, what level of educational institution you're working in, it's just your audiences are different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything, with that you really, really love about the higher ed setting, or I'm still going to call it higher ed. I don't
Yeah,
know
it's still higher
what
ed.
it is like.
So
Or what's also, maybe along with that, what's something maybe you miss about not being in, like the K-12 realm?
yeah, so when I was direct in line as a faculty member, the thing that I loved was it was like the professional development that like Tech-TOSAs run, except all of the teachers wanted to be there because they were pre-licensed teachers or they were master students coming back. So it was like the best professional development day every single day because we had our things that we were working on and the alignment, and we were going to demonstrate it, and you were going to go do stuff on your own. You were going to come back and we were going to talk about it. And so from a teacher ed faculty perspective, both at the undergrad and graduate level, that was something that I was always really excited about. And I think that that kind of rings in like I've always enjoyed working with adults in education. The thing that I miss is, and this has happened both times in K-12 and in higher ed, the farther I'm away from students, like a lot of people are like, oh, I've got a bigger ripple. That's true, but also like you don't get to see anything, and you don't get to help in that boots on the ground way of really seeing what grassroots learning looks like. Higher ed did allow me to be really critical about teaching philosophy. And as part of being in higher ed, I had maybe like a background goal, which turned into a requirement to go get my doctorate. And within that, I did a lot of work around teaching philosophies that go above and beyond what I think like we all do through teacher prep and even through master's programs, and really thinking about like being a constructivist and co-constructing learning with whoever's learning, and flattening the power dynamics of like I am a teacher, I stand at the podium, to no, you help facilitate learning, you are a teacher, that is something to be incredibly proud of. And that title doesn't necessarily need to be emphasized with the design of a classroom or the design of how we structure learning. So one of the things in higher ed that I've been supporting is like the removal of physical power structures as it comes to our classroom design. So in our training spaces, I've stripped out podiums, and I have like a wheelie podium, which is really more like a storage cabinet that we have a podium style sign on the back of. And it's always in the corner because we don't only use it when we have a speaker that needs it or when we have a really important reason to have that visual source of power. And then in a lot of our teaching spaces that we're updating, shifting away from like, here's an instructor station where there's a computer and all the things are always found here, to really embracing like, how do we do teleconference hardware and software that also allows our faculty to be anywhere in the room with their device, whatever that may be. And so we've switched a lot over to Zoom rooms by Poly, and being able to shift into those areas, thinking about where do our lead learners, our faculty, or our teachers need to be in a classroom to be most effective, and where are they most comfortable? And do those two things always match? No, they don't. But how can we make spaces that are fitting students also?
Yeah,
And
do you
if
think some of that maybe comes from, and I don't know, maybe I'm stretching this a little bit too, but like your background as an elementary teacher, you're not up in front of, you're getting the kids doing, and
Yeah.
some of that hands-on type learning, which and I get you trying to recreate in that virtual space, but is that where that comes from, or is it, or
Yeah.
maybe it comes from some research in other
And
in other
so
aspects
so
of your
I've
life?
I've had really good conversations around that, and I'm privileged to have secondary educators, both in higher ed and in K-12, be like, no, 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 this does work better. We don't need these podiums to demand trust and authority in a classroom, and that there's certain logistic perspectives where it needs to make sense because that's the on-camera spot or the mic works best there or whatnot.
Mhm.
But as it comes to thinking about like power structures within learning, setting those aside, and maybe that is a little bit more learner choice and authentic experiences and things that happen organically in an elementary setting, but are also very true within like adult learning science.
And Dave, as you've kind of worked with others both at both levels, and just thinking about the professional learning networks that you've been a part of, do you feel like that has helped foster new thoughts for you, or just like in terms of learning things to improve from other people? How has professional learning networks impacted some of the work that you've done at either level?
Yeah. So I think that professional learning networks have ended up being something that I'm really passionate about. My dissertation is completely on that because it became something that I was so passionate about. And as we take a look at these networks of individuals, sometimes when we're in rural districts or when we are thinking about education in a way that isn't like the norm, or we're in like a leadership or semi-leadership position, without having a network of people who are thinking in a similar vein or in a similar perspective, like a role design, we end up being little silos and sitting on islands of one and not being able to think critically with others, not being able to collaborate. And so a lot of work that I do is through networks now. Here in Minnesota State, so St. Cloud State is part of Minnesota State, the larger state system in higher ed here in Minnesota. I work with the Network for Educational Developers, and that is a system-wide team of more than 60 people and more than, I don't know, like 300 individuals at the conferences that are held, that come together around how is it that we handle different topics that come up? How are we helping training and development around different things? And how do we help faculty learn about learning? Because often faculty learn about their discipline, but not teaching and learning. And then I still have really, really deep roots in K-12, and I'm never going to let them go. So between Minnesota Learning Commons and then also the Minnesota Generative AI Alliance, those are also PLNs. Those are opportunities to connect with others. And really, those two groups, I think, help bring different perspectives that sometimes conflict, so that you can sharpen skills, you can sharpen mindsets, you can really critically think through your perspective and help others think through theirs, so that after a conversation is done, it's not just, oh, I won that fight, but it really is, oh, wow, I'm thinking differently about this because of shared knowledge and shared experiences and shared resources. And I have these people who I can go to that have some sort of affinity to something that I'm interested in also. Super important part of like my job. I don't know. There's only a handful of director of onlines at a MnSCU institution, and we all do completely different jobs with overlapping responsibilities. We're all called different things. We are on different bargaining units. We're on different calendars. And so being able to get together and try and find like positions is a really important part.
Yeah, and one of the things that, so for us, like in the Southwest region, our region is extremely spread out, and so we have, and we'll go and visit schools and things, but we have to drive quite a ways to do that. And so, like one of the things we have is our regional tech integration group that meets once a month. Just we have to do it virtually, just because of the fact that we're so spread out. But yeah, it can definitely, if you're just kind of at your school and you're the one tech integration person, there I think is a lot of opportunity there where you'll feel isolated if you don't have opportunities to connect. So can you talk a little bit about maybe some solutions to that, like opportunities that folks, if they are feeling, maybe they're listening to this podcast and like, yeah, I'm the only person within the 200 miles that is the tech integration person. It doesn't have to be tech integration, but
Yeah.
Is there other solutions that you've come across or can offer?
Yeah. So leaning on some different forms of social media can be a great way to find others and to find networks. And if social media isn't necessarily something that you align with super well, thinking about professional organizations. So like if you're a social studies educator, they have a really thriving network just for social studies. And most disciplines like math and science also have them, where in K-12 education, like there's these direct affinity groups that are statewide nonprofits that also participate at a national level. And I think connecting with those individuals, my dissertation started off right before, it started off when Twitter was Twitter. And then there was a mass exodus of Twitter after several events. And I had to do a pretty significant pivot because social media and the use of social media for PLNs completely changed due to an acquisition and people being burned out from pandemic-related Facebook groups. And so I want to always be mindful that when we do use social media for finding networks of individuals, like we go and try to find like hashtags or search threads or chats that are hosted by an organization that we have affinity to, or using a social media most education is not super friendly with, like jumping over to LinkedIn, where there are really quality groups and conversations. They're not always as easy to find as they were on Twitter, but they still exist and they're still there. The other piece that I would throw out that I would have never been comfortable with as a K-12 educator is like, if you are reading somebody's work, it doesn't matter if it's a blog post on EduCause or ASCD, or if it's research, or if it's a blog post on y'all's website, like reaching out to the author in an email and saying like, hey, I appreciated this thing that you said. Can you tell me more? Or do you have any places to go? As a doc student, I realized that was such an incredible force to be able to leverage, and that most people that are putting content out in that way get giddy when they get an email like that, because they're usually under-recognized even if they're published. And I think about an author who wrote a technology framework, an education technology framework piece. And I reached out to him on LinkedIn. I was just like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I really appreciate your perspectives here. And like instantly followed me back, instantly having conversations, still having ongoing conversations. And that mentality of like, oh, I can form a network with people by literally like, I don't know, back in the day, we would have called them on the phone, like by emailing them. That is this powerful opportunity also. And something that's scary that first time you do it, but it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of stuff that you brought up is great because there is so many opportunities because of the online connectedness where you can, because I've had the same experience on LinkedIn and stuff where and I've told this to Jeremy, where we reach out to someone who we admire their work and we want to have them on the podcast and stuff. And it's always been surprising how willing they are to do that. Because, from our thinking, I think we're like, oh, that person's like really well known, they're going to be too busy. But I think we've been surprised every time where they're willing to collaborate with us on being on the podcast and stuff like that. And so that's always been really encouraging. But if you were to think about this from just a personal side of things, thinking about those connections, what professional connections have most shaped how you lead today, and why? If you want to mention specific people or like and what it was, or what have been the most meaningful for you?
So I think the most meaningful connections have been those who have standed a long-lasting piece. And so I have a pocket of individuals who I've collaborated with for like 7 years, and we've all changed jobs. And some of us have had kids graduate where the others have had kids for the first time. And that piece where we started as professional individuals who all did similar work and we grew a personal connection, I think was the biggest piece. And so like my gut core group, when I'm bouncing around to people, there's a a foursome where it's me and Jeff, Sean, and Lana. And if anybody needs Jeff, Sean, and Lana, they're easy to find. You can just jump on my LinkedIn and they're all right there. And then I look in my higher ed side and I think about Karen and Kristen as individuals who just continue to perpetuate ideas and connections. And I can definitely share some extra names and handles and things like that. But those individuals from two widely different perspectives have been groups of people that continue to always interface. And I look at that with like Jeremy right here, someone who I've worked with for years and years and years. And when we're jiving, we're jiving. And when we're not, we're on good terms. And it's just that piece of how these networks form of like, where's the synergy in the moment? And where's the piece where we've got, like ongoing other pieces also. And I think that there's such great opportunity to have really professional motivations and goals. And it also turn into like the people that you send holiday cards to without realizing, because they just start to mean something to you on a personal side. And then you ask for a letter of recommendation or whatnot, and you realize, wow, I've got these people that are here. And I didn't know that I had them. The other piece in that personal network thing that I never understood coming into higher ed was like, how do all my peer faculty know these people across the country and in different levels and organizations and things? And it's because people move, but connections don't need to stop. And so like I had a really close colleague move to Moorhead. I had a really important dean move to Chicago. And I'm still in communication with them each on a monthly basis, if not on a weekly basis. And I had someone who applied for a job from Minnesota at our institution moved to California for an even better job after they weren't like the fit that needed to be. And I think about like how that also is how a network grows, of like having those connections and keeping in touch with people, maybe like after college, after high school, like keeping in touch with them. Is such an important piece, because so frequently like our work friends stop when we no longer work with them, because work was the only thing that brought them together. And if you have more than that, like keep those connections stoked, because you never know when like a topic like artificial intelligence in education is going to open up like your phone ringing from Chicago because they're having like this crisis and they just think your perspective would be helpful. And those are really neat opportunities.
I think a couple things here. First, I'm going to use this moment because I think you kind of led into it a little bit, to make a major announcement. And it's coming from the fact that I've known you, Dave, for a long time, through various different roles that we have both had, but the connection has always stayed there. And so the major announcement is in August of 2026 in Mora, Minnesota, August 4th to be particular, Dave is going to be our keynote speaker at our Lake ECMEC conference. And I just am really excited to have you there. I was looking through old Twitter photos for another reason not too long ago, and I came across several of us enjoying post-conference collaborations, fellowship, using random tags like Toes 18 and things like that. And then
you're going to give people too much of a breadcrumb to go find
I'm going
those.
to. And so I just think it's great now to be able to leverage those connections through those networks. And I think I'm really excited. Well, I know I'm really excited to have you come and be a part of that day. So that was the first thing. And then the other thing here that, and this is weird because this has now happened a couple of times to David and I. We've gone over 20 minutes into an episode before AI really became a conversation point, which is, I mean, it was generally glanced off of, but it wasn't really brought up until like just about now too, which is maybe a good pivot point here, because I want to like focus on AI here for just a moment or two. And here I read this statement: AI is moving faster than institutional change. And so where do you see AI actually moving the needle right now when it comes to learning design? And if you want to focus on higher ed, that's great. If you want to take a broader approach to that too, that's fine.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to take a broader approach because when it comes down to it, learning design in higher ed and in K-12 is not that different. We've got different contractual things with some things, but it's about how do we design a huge amount of information that's sometimes overwhelming into something that people can grasp, internalize, and apply. And that's what it is about regardless. So artificial intelligence is absolutely moving faster than institutional change anywhere. K-12 is doing it better, faster, and stronger because they have always done things better, faster, and stronger, except for scholarly research. And that is another hot take that I'm going to say and be okay saying. Higher ed moves slower and is more driven in faculty autonomy as subject matter experts. And artificial intelligence is scary, I think, in both of those areas. But when we take a look about it from a learning perspective, AI has incredible learning opportunities when we design use cases around it where there's intentionality. If we're going to take generic assignment prompts that we could find online anyways, and then we say, well, students can do them using AI. Well, students could go on Chegg or whatever website they had Spark Notes before, and they could find the same papers. AI is just writing them now. There's no difference from an academic integrity piece, and students who are doing it because they don't value the learning. As we take a look at some intentional uses around AI, we can build it into the learning process of maybe the initial feedback of something, or having it help with a critical perspective review of something, or even something as trivial as flashcards, study prompts, making a quiz, making a jingle to help a student remember something, and building in these more trivial skills around how to use artificial intelligence from a learner perspective. Both Microsoft and Google, which are the two bigger areas when it comes to AI in education, have a learning suite and a teaching suite of tools where there's great opportunities to like leverage their models in designing learning materials, both from a learner perspective or a teaching perspective. And I think those are great. But what sometimes it does is it brings questions around like copyright or the intellectual property of like, whose is this? It also introduces a really important thing where we need to be intentional and mindful around AI process. If someone is producing it with AI and someone is completing it with AI and then the feedback is produced by AI, like, why is anyone here? And so being intentional around how we use it, both from the employee in the room and the learner in the room perspective, is such an important thing. And I know we've got a note for later about AI policy or AI practice. And I'm just going to pull that up to this topic right here. I think in both K-12 education, public education, and higher ed, we have so many policies that are about the internet, that are about data security, that are about governance of information, that introducing a whole suite of AI policy isn't necessarily where we need to go. Introducing maybe a policy and an alignment table around AI use and intentional ethical and moral use of technology, and then a table of policies that you need to keep in mind that you might not realize AI touches, is I think a really good practice. When we come into the practice side of AI use, we're able to put in a lot of procedural documents and a lot of practice underneath a policy in both higher ed and K-12, where we're setting the tone and we're providing examples and resources. And I think that that's one of the most critical things that we can do, because policy work should be like 3 to 5 year sprints. We shouldn't need to change it all the time, but we know AI is changing much faster than that, and the use of AI is changing much faster than that. So thinking about our practices, our procedures, and our supporting documents in like policy language is such an important perspective as we move forward.
Yeah, and so if you think about this here, and whether, what are those appropriate use or best use? Do you think that they're like, to me, I think about it like, if you're going to be integrating AI into assisting you with whatever it happens to be, whether the designing a lesson or, being a tutor to your learning or assisting you with feedback, is there a role? I mean, to me, it's really no different than what good teaching would look like otherwise, except now you're just adding that person who's become kind of a collaborator, not person, this tool that's becoming
Yeah.
a collaborator and can be used to things to help me get to think about where maybe I don't have to think of UDL as an afterthought. Maybe it just becomes part of what I do anyway. And maybe, taking that learner-centered approach doesn't have to be an afterthought to what as a teacher I need to do, but maybe putting the student up ahead and maybe my collaborator can help me do that more effectively.
Yeah, I think what you're really bringing forward is a perspective of creating like an agent or a gem or whatever Anthropic is going to call it. I think they call them agents also, and saying, here's some conditions I want in a thought partner. And Karen Qualley actually does an incredible job at this, where we will take a look and say, like, a change management model that I personally stick to is a Lippitt-Noster model. And it helps us identify, like, if you communicate these elements, it'll be successful. But if you're missing any one of those elements, here's how it's going to fail. And so I've built in on my own personal ChatGPT piece that I use for strategic visioning of all sorts of work that I do. I have a little chat where all it does is it helps me think through the Lippitt-Noster model, so that when I'm thinking about change management, it's helping me identify, have I communicated all of the things in a way that makes sense for the audience that I've already said? And am I providing the resources? And so that takes about an hour of time off of my job of even just reviewing and saying, like, did I do all these things? Because I don't say, did it, and say yes or no. I say, did it do this, and provide evidence real quick. And so I wrote the stuff, or I've articulated the stuff in groups with or without AI. I know what's there. And now I'm having it provide that little critical analysis. And I'm looking at the feedback it provides me to support the critical analysis. And then I'm making that final call judgment of, do I feel comfortable moving forward? And I think that in lesson design, absolutely the same thing. If we want to bring in UDL, or if we want to bring in something from a rigor model, or if we want to bring in Marzano or Danielson taxonomies, whatever they may be that we're working on at a district level, and say, is this helping in this fashion? And providing the correct documents so that AI is able to assist in providing that feedback, such a meaningful way to put and leverage in this tool.
Yeah, what about this from this perspective here too? Do you think there's an AI practice around today that you think will feel obvious in say 5 years from now, that, maybe today still feels a little controversial? That's a
So I
tricky
think,
one.
yeah, I think drafting emails and drafting communication feels really controversial. And I think that people will see that having a draft of an email created by an agent is probably less controversial than it needs to be. I will stand up today and say, like, there are many communications that I draft in partnership with my agent, because I want it to come across in a tone that's going to be well received without losing the integrity of content that I might be really blunt about. And so, like, I have this blunt list of, I need to communicate these things, and it helps me bring it into a more human-centered, softened tone for a specific audience, keeping in mind certain risk factors that I have already identified, because I know someone is going to take part with this, or someone's going to be critical of that. And so I have that built in. Do I, at the bottom of every email, say this was drafted in partnership? Nope, because I revise it to the world's end afterwards. And everything that I put in and everything that I take out of it, I've got human touch on after. But it is something that I think is still maybe considered as a controversial piece. The other has to do with publishing. And I'm okay with this being controversial, and I don't know how it's going to wiggle at the end. But when you are submitting as like an academic right now into a book, into an editorial, into scholarly publication, there's some really bold restrictions around AI use. And as someone who has published this much, but has reviewed a decent amount, I can tell you people aren't sticking to it. And people aren't sticking to it because it's a part of the process of research now. It's a part of the process of academic learning. And I think that people are not hiding it, and they're just allowing it to be there. And so I'm not sure what the take is going to be in 3 to 5 years around like AI and scholarly research, because I only see it being integrated deeper and deeper into the tools that we use.
And as you look at where ed tech is at right now, and maybe just the access or thinking about the barriers that get in the way of education for some, what would you say is where is ed tech falling short in making sure there aren't any barriers for people to access tools, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that like Ken Shelton spoke about tequity for years, and that's still a very important topic. Here in Minnesota, we've got rural areas where there are infrastructure gaps, and that just grabbing a hotspot is not the solution to that. And so I think from an infrastructure piece, there are pieces that ed tech really needs to step up, from even like ed tech companies, instead of lobbying for more data, maybe lobbying for more equitable allocation of resources so that there can be infrastructure. There's that element of it, but then we also have removing barriers and then looking at the bias that ed tech brings in. And I think that those are two really important pieces of the same picture, where the barriers that we have and the bias that ed tech and published curriculum bring are things that as educators, we need to account for and level with, because not every student is going to have access. Not every student is going to be represented in the materials. And also, as we're getting interactions with ed tech that's now enhanced with AI, there are going to be a set of biases that are in all of the materials that are there and automatically generated. I was at a symposium in Winona last summer, talking through like implementation reflections with AI in education, doing this facilitated evaluation discussion. And one of the curriculum development people, not from Winona, but that's where it was at, had pulled up a K-12 learning platform from one of the key publishers and said, for free, at our current base contract, this level of AI is now turned on by default and we can't turn it off. And it had to do around like creating custom learning materials. And then we can pay, and there's more and more levels in creating these custom materials. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And he was like, here's my issue. And it had to do with the types of questions that were being produced, being some of those stereotypical questions that going through school, we all learned, like you can't create things that are so specific to geographic experiences or experiences that are socioeconomical or culturally driven. And those were some of the things that it was pulling in. And as ed tech changes the way they do things and correct for biases, I think that we'll also have an overcorrection. And it'll still be important to have human eyes on everything that we're putting in front of our learners, which is why we're here. I think that's one of the most important things. Like AI can't take the jobs of dedicated people in education who see the value of human interaction.
Yeah, it's interesting that what you brought up too about the rural area, because I just thinking back to like when COVID was happening, right? There was like we had everybody moved to some form of online learning, right? And even when you're in person, you're in Google Class, you're in a learning management system of some kind, and you're accessing work that way. And then what we found out really quick, obviously, was we have to actually get internet access to a bunch of kids now, and so then we had like buses dropping off hotspots and things like that, like that became very apparent that all of a sudden this was a massive need that we weren't prepared for. The response was actually super impressive because we were able to at least get that out to them, but I think it was more the realization that like, oh, we're in trouble a bit here, we got to figure this out, right?
Yeah.
And then could you just touch too briefly on how universal design for learning is? And you kind of did a little bit, I think, but just from that perspective of designing lessons and accommodating for different learning styles and things like that. And feel free to tie in AI too and how that connects. But what about the importance of universal design for learning for accessibility and all sorts of different things that students face?
Yeah, absolutely. So universal design for learning really founds itself or is founded in thinking about multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. And as we think about like where accessibility fits into UDL, it's a blanket where wherever we're doing UDL work, we're also creating more accessible and inclusive experiences. And so that's an important element to acknowledge as we think through moving forward in using artificial intelligence to ideate what UDL means to any type of lesson. We can think about the multiple means of engagement being a really important one, brainstorming what are different ways to still get to the same student learning outcome or standard benchmark that we have, and being open to thinking about how do we interact with learning from a behavioral mindset, from an attitude mindset, or from a physio-locomotor mindset, or I guess ability set, and how do we interact with knowledge to be able to interpret it and apply it. So coming up and like literally just brainstorming with AI, like what are different ways that I can do this? What are different ways that students could demonstrate this? Skill set would be a great way for us to look at multiple means of representation, because representation is really how do students demonstrate that they've learned something. And then as we think through how accessibility folds onto all of these, as we have new formatting come into play that we're not familiar with, or we have new images that we're needing to bring into our lessons, using artificial intelligence to help review for the WCAG 2.1 AA standards, like is this accessible, or how can I make this more accessible in relation to the WCAG 2.1 AA standards, is a great like little prompt. Or helping identify inclusive alt text for an image, and then reading what it returns to you in that query and saying, okay, so now how am I using this image? And here's a piece of inclusive alt text. How do I, frame this in a similar way? When it gets down to applying UDL and accessibility or digital accessibility together, it really is about making sure that every learner, regardless of their abilities or perspectives or learning preferences, has opportunity to engage with the content that we're sharing, the content that we're assessing them on, and also that our assessments are well articulated to what we're actually teaching. And so it's this great kind of 360 around, is what I'm doing what I'm expecting? And do learners have some choice that all provide equitable experiences?
Dave, that's great. And I think that definitely has to be that space for the UDL. But, as you think of it, from your perspective, what's harder right now? Is it harder changing systems or changing mindsets?
Yeah, I think that's a great piece for us to think through. And in the context of both artificial intelligence and digital accessibility, which is a regulation that we're all faced with, most institutions, regardless of what type, haven't spent enough time talking about either of them for us to really expect a system to change or a mindset to change overnight. And so I think that as we think through changing a system requires shared engagement across like bargaining units and unions and employee representation, the admin and the classroom teacher, and down to like the students, which I think a lot of org changes forget to include around how does this need to work and what is valued by this organization. And we have maybe a chicken and egg piece, because until the system is changed, mindsets aren't required to move. In both K-12 education and higher education, I think we've prided ourselves on earning our degrees and the experiences and years served in our institutions or in our professions. And so like the next trendy thing is just going to be this too shall pass. Like I think that every phrase like that has been used for both digital accessibility and AI. And it's not true. Like these are things that are here and our expectations that will be long-term pieces. And so changing the mindset, I think, really also helps, or is required for us to help individuals think about why we're in this profession. Why is it that we work in public ed? Why is it that we are serving all students who come to us? Why is it that we're teaching in general at all? Is it an affinity for the subject? Is it an affinity for helping people learn? Is it this helped me get through service loans? Identifying it helps us at least identify like that philosophy alignment. And with that can come a mindset change. I was helping a group of faculty just the other week think broadly around why digital accessibility is important, not just a regulation. And I said, you have so much knowledge and expertise around your discipline that will never be accessed by those who can't learn exactly like you did. And you just said you want to share it with the public. And this helps us share it with everyone. And that really appealing to like those core pieces of why we do our jobs and why we chose this profession, I think ends up being an important element of changing mindsets. And then when we have a couple more mindsets, especially bold mindsets changed, we can come back to the changing systems piece and kind of continue to have both of them grow. Here at my home institution, we have new administrative leadership. And so like we are going to be doing a significant systems change, and the mindsets will influence that. But at the end of the day, our senior lead is going to say, this is what we need to be when we're done. And everyone will need to be supporting that set of goals. Very similar to strategic planning in K-12 educations. If it's not supporting these essential goals, we're not prioritizing it. And I think that's an important part.
Yeah, I could totally see that, how it kind of has to be a weaving of some mindset shift, make a change, mindset shift, make a change. And it kind of has to, you bring the different players to the table, you honor and you value the experiences and the perspectives of others. But at the end of the day, like you said, as an institution, you have to move a direction, and the people have to kind of come with you when you do that. So David, this has been fantastic. And I know we kind of end each of our episodes with a little bit of lightning round, where we are going to ask you some questions about random things, maybe related to what you do, maybe just some off the wall kind of things. And feel free to respond to them, with one word, with one sentence, or a paragraph, or however long you need to go to explain it, or just leave it hanging and leave people wondering. That's totally fine too. So we're going to kick off our lightning round here, and I think I'll do the first one, and then David, you can take the next one here if that's all right. So Director of Online Learning here at St. Cloud State, is online learning a revolution, or is it an evolution?
Evolution. It's been around for a long time. We're only getting better.
What worries you, not in a panicky way, but in a we should pay attention to this way?
Yeah. Critical thinking and local autonomy of curriculum.
What's a conversation about ed tech and justice that we're still not having, but we should be?
Who are missing voices? Why are they missing? And we already know that. So why are they really missing?
Okay. And what is your leadership superpower?
This one came to me from a previous boss twice, two different bosses, and it was, you can see all of the puzzle pieces individually and the whole puzzle at once, and I don't know how you do it.
You see the forest and the trees.
Yep, and both of them related it in the exact same way in very similar conversations, and they were at two different institutions, so that was neat.
Thinking back to some of your dissertation work, what's one PLN habit you think everyone should steal?
Saying hi.
All right, the next one is a this or that rapid fire, which I'm actually pretty pumped that Jeremy added because I've seen these with like sports stuff before. So this is pretty cool, but you can only choose one. Jeremy, do I get to do all these?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Awesome. Okay, so here we go. So you have to choose one, this or that: AI policy or AI practice?
AI practice.
Innovation or sustainability?
Sustainability.
Design for all or design for most?
Design for most.
Experimentation or evidence?
Experimentation.
Scalability or personalization?
Scalability.
Okay, and then this last one is on conferences. So hallway conversations or keynote sessions?
After hours fellowship. Hallway conversations.
We'll add that one in there. We'll put the after hours one in there. That you just couldn't see it. It was
hallway conversations, because I don't know how much after hours I will be there for like academic, but hallway conversations.
Well, Dave, absolutely fantastic to have you here. We just got one more of the lightning rounds, and that is this, and maybe this is just a little bit of me trying to plan ahead. What's the Dave Blanchard keynote or presentation walk-up song? What should be on stage as you come across to that, in front of that audience?
I have no clue. I love that question, and I need to think about it. But I'm also someone who's like, I'm very big into music and big into like the EDM and rave scene, and so I think that it's going to be loud and high energy. And probably something by John Summit.
All right.
Yeah.
Finally, before we do let you go here, Dave, we know that you have the Lake ECMEC conference coming up in August, but is there anything that you want to share? We could try to give the stage over to our guests here, like contact information, or do you have an event or a project that you're working on that's coming up that you would like to promote? Now's your space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Contact information. I think the easiest way to get a hold of me and the most stable way is jumping over to LinkedIn and searching Dave Blanchard, Davidson Blanchard, and there's enough of a cookie crumb trail to find me through there. And I reply to almost any of the messages that don't seem like cold calls. The other piece that I want to share is part of a really cool collaborative and now nonprofit called Mingaya, or AI4MN. They're synonymous, but we host annual summits and also ongoing conversations that happen at least once a month on Fridays that bring human-centered elements to artificial intelligence and learning in an AI-informed era. And so I think that anyone wanting to continue the conversation as well as instantly grow their PLN could head over to ai4mn.org. Across the top of the page, there's some information where you can join. And there's also information where we've got our conference information, both for call for proposals and upcoming registration. It is always a really cool event. And part of what makes it cool is the hallway conversations and the keynote and the conversations that are held across a high school setting where we're able to have different learning from practitioners, and that it is a practitioner focused event. It is a leadership focused event. It's not a vendor driven event, although we do partner with vendors sometimes. But just joining ends up being a great opportunity. And I invite both of you to also join. I know that within Mingaya, we've had conversations around the importance of both ECMEC and SWWC for different reasons. And I think I just need to actually send out emails to both of you with a little bit more formality, but that we've got some cool things coming up where we've got partnership opportunities, because better together is always a Minnesota thing, I think. And yeah, just education is not something that we can do alone, and not something where one organization gets to do all of it or any of it alone. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. We'll make sure to put a couple of those links into the show description
Awesome.
when this gets shared out. So again, Dave, thanks for your time, and just really appreciate all the things that you do.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Dave.